You're listening to Mornings with Eric and Brigitte here on Moody Radio, South Florida, 89.3.
The president of Mexico is a lovely woman.
So that is the worship music of our time together in Turkey. And one of the women singing there, Celia, we're going to tell you more about her later. But there were so many women that joined us on this trip with Women in the Window International. Kim Kerr is in studio with me. I just returned, Kim, with you and others as we traveled there to meet these women. And they came from many countries, Egypt, Lebanon, and beyond, to this one place. And it was really a time of refreshment for them, wasn't it? That's part of what Women in the Window does in the training, but it's also about community, the community we share together with them.
Yeah. Good morning, Brigitte and Eric. So
Morning.
nice to be with you, both of you this morning. And absolutely. So we do, as Women in the Window International, we have long-term relationships with women that are top-level leaders in their nation. And the goal is to, as you mentioned, refresh them in the Lord, because we all need that. And I think especially in their context, with all the oppression against women that is culturally acceptable, would not be acceptable in most Western cultures in this day and age. And then we add to that the layer of being Christians. So Christians are so terribly oppressed. So absolutely to care for them, to minister to them, but also to equip and empower them, because God's called them to some phenomenal places of ministry that you and I will never have access to, Brigitte, as much as we would love to.
So you gather together as a group, and you have a plan. I'm sure it probably morphs and changes as you're going through those times together. But what ultimately, what are you trying to gain or hope to give to these women at that season?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric. So we have a long-term partnerships in Africa and Asia and the Middle East, North Africa region. This was Middle East, North Africa. And we have 5 different capacities. So it's, spiritual development, leadership development, business development, health, and then human rights. So sometimes our trainings are very uniquely focused on just one of those capacities. In this case, it was, I would say, probably a combination. And Brigitte, it was so wonderful to have you,
Yes.
but like leadership and spiritual development. So our goal is over the course of several years to really impart some trainings that are of value, of great value, that can actually equip them and bring them to another level of their ministry capacity. And we saw that happen.
But this one specifically, again, that combination of leadership and heart. Leslie Leyland Fields joined us in Turkey to teach her course, Your Story Matters.
Right.
And it's amazing how when you teach just that concept that, wait, I have a story to share
Sure.
that can help others as I've processed it. And so she walked us through that over that week of processing our own stories and then writing them in a way that's redemptive. That was the goal. I think we saw that, didn't we?
Absolutely. So we do choose a different training curriculum. And this time we were so blessed to have Leslie Leyland Fields, the author of Your Story Matters. And she repeated that throughout the week, didn't she, Brigitte? Your story matters.
Yeah.
And you could just kind of see the women's faces light up like, my story does matter. They don't hear that. We probably hear that
Right.
from someone in our context, but they don't hear that. But they experienced, and you're right, Leslie's method is phenomenal. Both the outer story, okay, this is what actually happened in one, isolated scene, but then the inner story of, oh, that's why that matters. Bringing it all together.
And then so on the final night of this conference, because I was there, I can kind of give you the inside scoop. We sat in circles and by languages, and of course, we were in the same group because we speak the same language. And some of the women, even though they're from Lebanon, spoke perfect English. And they shared one by one their stories. And they were all unique. But they were deep. And I even think of one woman who actually was born in Iran, but traveled and now lives in Lebanon. And her sharing her story of, meeting her husband there in Lebanon. And now that's why she's there.
Sure.
But the reason she traveled there, because she was born a Christian in a nation like Iran. And there was no opportunities for her to grow in her faith and study. She wanted to study, go to seminary.
Right.
And so there was that opportunity in Lebanon. And the inner stories of that obviously were more intricate and more, there were so many details and layers to that. And we got to hear their stories. And one of the things that I left with, Kim, and maybe you can share what you left with, but I left really inspired by hearing their stories.
Yeah. You know, Bridget, I have long-term relationships with these women, but I would totally agree with you that this took it to yet another level. And what I loved was seeing their faces light up and like I said, the awareness come to them as, again, my story matters. You know, I've known many of those stories, maybe not all the details like the proposal.
Yes, that Karina shared.
That our Iranian sister shared that was so cute. That was a fun story. But the other story, and I knew the background of one of the sisters in that circle who had struggled with drug addiction. And understandably so. And so she's a first-generation Christian. She did not come from a Christian household, still does not live in a Christian household. But to hear how God met her and this training conference and brought healing and hope, and she talked about that quite a bit in her story. And other encounters with we had such a great team, didn't we?
We did.
Our volunteer team.
We did.
Amazing
team. And that's the other part, Eric. When I think about the team that we were with, mostly women, but my husband Gibson was there and he helped out, and Fred was there, and he used his talents of really administration.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a word for all of us, that God can use all of our gifts in a context of the mission field, because his gift of just spreadsheets. He was able to organize everything. There was a lot of organization that needed to happen cross-culturally, and he understood it. And that's just one example of God using all of our talents to advance his kingdom on the mission field. And so if your gift is spreadsheets, you can be used too.
Well, what's it like? I mean, it'd be hard enough for me to put a conference together in Boca. You're going to a different world, basically. How does that even, how do you manage that?
Yeah. It is, you know, I was just thinking as you were sharing, Bridget, in answer to your question, Eric, is Women in Window values are, we value our, one of our values, kind of redundant here, but is the use of volunteers. So our budget is relatively small, and a lot of that is because we have so many great volunteers like Fred and Bev Anthony. So Bev came years ago and decided she wanted to write love notes. So that's one of our principles of when we put together, we do have a plan, a strategic plan, and then we have smaller plans for each region and then for each training, to answer your point. And there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into it. But, you know, Bev wanted to write a love note from women in the United States. So there again, even if you can't go, you can go.
Yeah.
But she would sit with each woman and have them, you know, write a note back. That's something we had never done before. So a lot of planning goes into it. Like I said, there is, spreadsheets galore, but we've done it for a number of years. And so there's a system.
What's it like for those that have come? It might be one of the first times in weeks or months or years that they've been able to not have to look over their shoulder, it seems like. What's it like for them just to be able to breathe and relax?
Yeah. I think gratitude. I mean, I don't know what you probably seeing it through fresh eyes, Bridget. You might see something else. I just saw overwhelming gratitude the whole entire time. And, you know, almost embarrassingly so. Some of that is directed, you know, towards me, towards the mission. But we just point it back to the Lord, because it's the work that God is doing through Women in the Window. But they are so full of gratitude and joy.
So much joy. I think of one sister in particular who works in a North African region, and she said, I mean, we arrived on a Monday evening. They arrived on Tuesday, and the moment she saw you, Kim, her words were, thank you. Thank you for this time. And then at the end of the conference, she talked about how she needed this because in her context, she is always ministering and pouring out, and it's a hostile nation to her faith. So she is always looking over her shoulder. She is always careful. But she talked about how this was such a unique conference for her, too, because if she does go to a conference, it's usually how to do more, you know, how to be more effective, how to, you know, we kind of like that sort of thing.
Sure.
But she says this conference this week was so different, what Women in the Window did for her to give her time to exhale and just
Beautiful.
be with other women and receive that ministry too, not ministering, but she got ministered to.
Yeah.
And I remember one night sitting with this particular sister over dinner, Gibson and I, and just her overflowing, telling me her testimony and her story of how she came to Christ, how she became a missionary in this particular region. And on this trip, there was just another fold, another level to her ministry that God's also going to do. And so she just talked about, she's like, I'm glad you all are here and you're all enjoying this, but this was for me. This was for me. I needed this. But I think they all felt the same way.
Yeah. It was wonderful to have you and Gibson, by the way. I just want to brag on the Lord and thank you for taking the time and the effort to be with us, because that meant a lot to the sisters too. You know, that you would come all that way, that you would invest your time, and that you would sit and listen. You know, we so seldom listen to people from the heart and just want to hear what God's doing in their life or where they're hurting. Yeah. So thank you for that.
The privilege was mine, and I agree that there's something about hearing each other's story that blesses the one who's sharing, but I think I was more blessed. I'm like, are you kidding me? Thank you. How many times I say that to you? Thank you for letting me come, because it changed so much for me.
And I was thinking about, so we each wrote our own stories as well. So when I wrote my story, about the prompt for that particular scene was, this is worth remembering. I always want to remember. And so I started writing about a situation that I encountered, and it's probably referencing the woman that you just described, where I was listening to her conversation in the hallway. And I heard her, and I knew who she was talking to, obviously having the relationships. That's my privilege. And then I heard her saying, oh, you're from that place. That place God wrote on my heart when I was first born again as a child, and then began to unfold to me. That's where he wants me to go. She's a cross-cultural missionary from Latin America. And I was like, oh, my word, because that's a really hard place. And she can't wait to get there. And that happened because we were there, because we brought this conference together. Now, God could have done that a number of other ways. I'm sure he would have. But and that was my story. All the hard work, because it is, Eric, that went into planning and praying and raising support for this and all the things that we do as in a ministry was like, boom. You know what? God did something there that I'm sure for generations to come, probably long after I'm in glory, will still be happening. So we kind of just set things up for the Holy Spirit, don't we?
Yeah.
And hopefully put the right people in place and the right tools and then just see, because these women are on fire. It's very much like New Testament life for them. They are facing persecution on a daily basis.
Yeah. Do you get to hear from them? I mean, I'm assuming communication, they also have to watch their back. I'm assuming communication, they still have to be careful with what they're saying and how they're saying it. So do you get to hear from them and know what this opportunity you had to be with them, what it's been like for them?
Absolutely. I've heard from all of them since I've been home. So, and what we're going to actually be doing, and they do be careful. There's different methods, there's different apps and what have you that are more secure than others. And always we're careful what we say and how we say it. The gals that were going back to North Africa, for example, messaged when they were safely home and said they were only detained this time for 12 minutes. They're often detained for hours or perhaps even overnight. So that was
an answer to prayer.
A huge blessing, answer to prayer. But we'll be putting together a cohort to take this method, and with the privilege of Leslie Leland Fields, who's so generous, but she'll of course be part of it, but to move this method forward so that it can be multiplied in their contacts throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And we're talking places like Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, all over the Middle East, and then North Africa, which is actually harder for Christians than even the Middle East. So we do talk.
That's a big part of Women in the Window as well, is multiplication. That what happened on our trip doesn't end there,
right?
That it's multiplied.
Yeah.
And there's just something about saying yes to what the Lord asked you to do. And I think if I were to have one encouragement to all who's listening, is if the opportunity to go on mission happens for you and you feel that tug, but you don't have all the answer of how it's going to work out, say yes and watch God do
That's
the
beautiful.
rest. And then he does way more. Ephesians 3:20 that you
Yes.
can think or imagine.
Amen. Yeah,
He did that for
3:20
me.
and 21, the next generation to follow.
Yeah.
And then we will be having, there's opportunities galore with any mission. There's so many missions, and thank you all for how you promote every
Absolutely.
mission, I think, but certainly Women in the Window and volunteer opportunities, prayer opportunities, gathering together, serving in the office. But we will have another event, and actually one later this year, about 6 months out, but one of the women who is in one of the most difficult places. We're calling her Celia. That's not her name, but she and her husband. Man, Eric, come on.
There you go.
They're going to be at our fall
They're going to be
gala
our
event.
speaker at our fall event. So, and they're in a very persecuted nation. He's been arrested numerous times, has charges against him. So we're actually hoping to turn things around by bringing them here, not make it more difficult for them, but give access to the right people.
So that event
we'll
is
see.
down the line in a few months.
November 15th.
But November 15th, you can mark it on your
Yes.
calendar and you can join us there because it's going to be just maybe a taste of what we experience. You'll have a taste of it at that night and have the opportunity to hear more about this ministry and support the work, this Great Commission work. You can find out a link to Women in the Window at our website right now, ericandbrigitte.org.
Here's We Are Messenger.